And this is the Incongruous channel, and I'm Dr. Andy Yates. And this show is going to be about 9/11. That was 9/11 2001, when the Twin Towers went down and other buildings went down and stuff like that. And this was a show I did on my radio show on Beetroot Radio, www.beetrootradio.co.uk, on Saturday. So that means that there is a squeezed down podcast of that show, about 100 minutes long, with a lot of detail in it, a lot of thoughts, lots of facts, lots of theories, lots of conspiracy, all out there at www.drandyyates.com. You should be able to see the podcasts as soon as you log into that website. So what I'm going to talk about today, because I don't have the time, it would take a couple of weeks to talk about all the facets and permutations of the 9/11 issue and how it all went down and how that happened and the theories that are behind it. All I'm going to say up front is the one thing I am sure of about this, because I'm not sure exactly what happened, but the one thing I am sure of, and I just feel it, is that the official explanation, the government explanation, whatever you want to call it, is not true. That's what I feel. That's my personal opinion. And you decide, and I suggest you go to my show because there's a lot more evidence and facts and stuff in there. And you can draw your own opinion, right? So that's the way that works. Now, this little bit, I thought, well, how can I chop that lot down to 20 minutes or less than 20 minutes for my YouTube video? And then I realized, oh yeah, what I can do is I can say, what do you do when you carry out any investigation, whether it's a criminal investigation or just some kind of research, is you follow the money. All right. So I'm going to look at a couple of aspects concerning money as far as 9/11 is concerned, and you can make your own opinion. And as I said, if you need more information, please go to that podcast. All right. So first of all, let's talk about a guy called Silverstein or Silverstein, spelt Silverstein, might be pronounced Silverstein. And he's the guy who bought the World Trade Center building number 7. So he owned it. And he leased a number of World Trade Center buildings. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that. So he bought all of these things. And on the surface, hey, it's a real estate transaction. That's what happens. But when you start to dig into it a bit, you realize that he was buying a croc, a white elephant. This thing is a mess. And he bought it in the year 2000, so a year or so before the actual supposed terrorist attacks. And he took out a loan for a small amount, well, a relatively small amount, a lot to you and me, I'm sure. But, it was about 150 million or something like that, and then joined with some other people and bought this lot. And one of the problems with the buildings was, apart from the fact that there was at least $200 million worth of upgrades that needed to be done, the buildings contained asbestos, right? And those of you who know me will know that I was very much into the theatre, particularly at RAF St. Athan, and they had a theatre there. And as I was in charge of the building or whatever, and I fought and fought and fought and fought to keep that building open. The big problem was asbestos in the roof. And that meant that I really didn't have solid ground to argue about keeping this building open. And eventually it was demolished. Of course, that was when council tax came in and every building had council tax applied to it. So a lot of the single-purpose buildings, especially these outlying kind of clubs and society buildings like the rugby club, football club, this kind of thing, theatre club, they were torn down. Okay, and you can look at it on Google Earth now and see where they used to be. So there it is. He's bought these buildings. He's bought them. They're full of asbestos. They need all this money spent on them. That's a simple fact. That's a simple fact. Now, he had to take insurance out. All right. Some people say this is a conspiracy, but he had to take insurance out. It was standard. Okay. The buildings he leased from the Port Authority, the New York Port Authority, he had to take insurance out on them. And you would take insurance out on any building. That's a fact. And he took out insurance, which included insurance against terrorist attack. Maybe that was standard, maybe not. But he was certainly covered at the time of the attacks, right? And I've got some notes here and I will be referring to them. The problem is that even to demolish it, because this is valuable real estate right in the middle of New York City, it would have to be done floor by floor because of the asbestos. You couldn't just knock the building down, which would have looked very much like what happened when they went down, if you see what I mean. A controlled demolition, down into their own footprint, because look at all the dust that came up. All that would have to be contained. Why? Because it contained asbestos, right? And the damage it did to people, and you see that the damage occurred to the firefighters and other people and first responders and stuff like this because of that dust. Because that dust contained other materials, but also asbestos. Okay. I mean, you got to wonder, he leased it for 100 years, still half full of asbestos. They'd have to be demolished floor by floor. He wasn't going to do that. I think he applied and they said, no, you can't do it. He's only spent, I think, about $14 million on it. He got an immense payout, but we'll come to that in a second. Okay. He also owned building WTC 7. The tower of building 7, 47 floors high, which fell down on its own, into its own footprint, just as if it was a controlled demolition. Just as if. That's all I'm saying. That's what it looked like. Okay? So you've got to wonder, haven't you? You've got to wonder. And he's even had TV interviews, and one TV interview, he talks about pulling the building. Well, there's a lot of conspiracy about this, because pulling the building is a word sometimes used by demolitions peoples. When they pull the building, that means they kind of pull the detonator and the whole thing comes down. All right, so that's part of it too. So they were all insured, and because there was 2 attacks, or because there were 2 buildings, I'm not sure about the details of it, but certainly 2 attacks, he collected twice. He asked for something like 7.1 billion. Remember, his investment was 14 or 140 million, something small-ish. And he ended up with 4.5 billion. And he is now involved in the rebuild of it and the other buildings. I think he's put up another 3 tower blocks because of that. Very good, very good. Interesting little fact. He used to always have breakfast because he owned the Twin Towers. So he always used to have breakfast in the North Tower, up in the restaurant at the top with new clients and things like this. And it luckily happened that on 9/11, the day the terrorists actually attacked, he happened to have a medical appointment, so he didn't go. Well, there you are. How fortunate. How very lucky he was, right? Lucky in all ways, right? Some people would say he's laughing all the way to the bank. $4.5 billion. Amazing. Amazing. And everybody around is breathing asbestos. Pretty much the whole of New York City breathing asbestos. It's quite incredible, isn't it? But all I'm saying is follow the money. Look at that. See what you think. Okay? Going to turn the page here on my notes and move on to another one. Now, obviously, these buildings had various different purposes. And you know, a lot of the evidence for investigating why the towers went down and so on was immediately carted off to scrap merchants, the steel, and then melted down. So the evidence had gone very, very quickly. And you've got to ask the question, how did a building just turn into powder? But there you go. These are other things to be thought about. But from 911research.wtc7.net, they say that there were precious metals in WTC4, which was another one owned by Silverstein, funnily enough. And only a fraction was recovered. Well, how does that work out? Well, there were published articles and they said, oh yeah, don't worry, we've been in there. There was a vault in the bottom of WTC4 and it contained gold, silver, a bullion, basically. And I was all brought out and all this kind of thing. Well, they refer to the removal of that gold in October 2001. So 1 month afterwards, they thought we better go down there and get that gold. On November the 1st, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani announced that more than $230 million worth of gold and silver bars that had been stored in a bomb-proof vault had been recovered. And then the New York Times Online, gave a rundown of the numbers of what should have been there, because it all was in a vault owned by a company called Comex. And you got to wonder that they knew what was in there, so they listed out what it was. And they said Comex Metals Trading, the company, 3,800 gold bars weighing 12 tons and worth more than $100 million. 100 million, okay. Comex clients, 800,000 ounces of gold with a value of about 220 million. How close is that to the 230 million that Mayor Giuliani said was recovered? But then they said Comex clients, 102 million ounces of silver worth 430 million, and the Bank of Nova Scotia also had a vault down there which had 200 million worth of gold. Well, do the math. All right, do the math. You've got 100 million of gold bars. You've got 220 million of ounces of gold owned by clients. So now you've got $320 million worth. You've got 102 ounces of silver worth 430. What did I say that was? 320, 750. And then you've got in the Bank of Nova Scotia 200 million. So $950 million worth of bullion, and they recovered 230 million. Just that's what the facts seem to say. Okay, so a whole bunch of gold, $500 million, more than that, seems to have just disappeared. Because there was lots of things disappeared during tragedy and the horror. Don't get me wrong, it was an awful, awful thing. But I tell you what, wouldn't it have been a lot more awful if it wasn't quite as the government said it was? If there was some intent, if there was a plan to actually make this happen, wouldn't that be even more dreadful than just the loss of 3,000 lives? And I got to say, for any Brits that are watching, hundreds of those were British. And then consequently, that led on to the war with Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, which was a complete and utter lie that both the British and the American governments were in coercion over, and 1 million people died there. So this is the extent of this horror, this tragedy. And if somebody had actually planned this and done it on purpose, or made it happen, or whatever, right? Scary, isn't it? Scary. Okay, but the big one, if we're talking money, this is the biggest one of all. On 8/11, guy called Rumsfeld, I think Donald Rumsfeld, right? It was the Secretary of State for Defense, I believe. He announced, well, there's been an audit. I asked for an audit done by this guy called Dov Zakheim, and he went to Halliburton, and this is Halliburton before the Iraq thing, and I think Halliburton got sacked because they were doing all kinds of nasty things and stuff like this with contractors and mercenaries and stuff. But anyway, Halliburton carried out the audit, and they found, gotta love this, they found that $2.3 trillion could not be accounted for. It had fallen out of somebody's pocket and gone down the back of the couch. Obviously. 203 trillion. That's 12 zeros. That's a billion. Oh my goodness. Just vanished. And you know what happened? The records for all the accounting and the legal, investigations into various things about accounting and stuff like this, The plane, or was it a missile, that hit the Pentagon, trashed all those accounting offices, just so happened, by luck, on 9/11, the day after this announcement, right? And then World Trade 7 went down, and that was the other place where the documents and investigations were going on by what they call the SEC, Security Economic Council, whatever they were. It just, coincidentally, boom, in they came, all the records gone, sorry, wipe the slate clean, we've just lost 2.3 trillion. And you've got to wonder, because if this was planned in advance, just speculating here, maybe there wasn't 2.3 trillion, maybe there was only 1 trillion, and they just upped the cost because then they got another 1.3 trillion that they could play with. Who knows? But here's the funny thing. Oh, it's not funny, actually. It's pretty horrid. Because the guy, Dom Zakheim, right? Dov Zakheim, whatever he was, who was the undersecretary who commissioned the audit, right? He had done a paper, and I'm going to read this from here, was the primary author of the infamous Project for a New American Century manifesto of September 2000, a year before, right? Which was titled Rebuilding America's Defenses. And this detailed just a crazy plan, right, for US military domination of the world and the reordering of the Middle East. And it was stated in that document that it might require a new Pearl Harbor to make it work, because they would need to get the people on their side, and that's what Pearl Harbor did. And there's lots of conspiracy theory about Pearl Harbor, which very strongly suggests, looking at where the ships were and how they moved and what advance notice they had and stuff like that, that Pearl Harbor, if nothing else, they knew it was going to happen, and they did nothing. Because once that happened, everybody in the world was on the side of America. Everybody's beating their chests and saying, oh, that's it, we're going to go and kick these Japanese up the butt. And that's what happened. And that was World War II, which was victorious, I suppose. All right? Depending on your definition of victory. But that's what they needed. And that's exactly what 9/11 did. Drew everybody together so the president could say, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. And everybody went, even anybody who had any questions just went zip. I know I did, because I was living in America at the time and I was a foreigner at that time. So I was like, I'm not saying anything. Just shut up until the dust settled, metaphorically speaking. So you get the idea. Follow the money. Follow the money. There's the money. There's 3 cases. We talked about Silverstein, the guy who owned the buildings. We talked about all this gold and stuff, and I'm sure there was more. And then we talked about this just insignificant number of $2.3 trillion, which disappeared. And of course, once 9/11 occurred, no one was talking about that anymore. They were all talking about 9/11 and survivors and this and that and who did it and how we're going to get back against them and all this kind of thing. There we are. So that's my little session on 9/11. Please listen to my show, www.drandyyates.com. If you like what I've said in this YouTube video, please like, share and subscribe. Keep my numbers up. More people will look at this and then maybe start asking some questions. And maybe it'll prove that the official version is correct. I'm fine with that too. I don't have an staked interest in this. But boy, there's so much that happened on 9/11 that, you know, we forget. It's usually how's breakfast in the restaurant, not today. You know, the missiles and the aeroplanes hitting in particular places on World Trade 7 and the Pentagon, etc., etc., etc. So that's that. So this is my little short on following the money in 9/11. This is Dr. Andy Yates. This is the Incongruous channel. Please take care.